Welcome to part 2, The People, of my 3-part series, Creating Moraine State Park. My name is Polly Shaw. This video is drawn from my book, Moraine State Park, by Arcadia Publishing, and from my popular park programs. Frank Preston was born May 14, 1896, in Leicester, England, in the East Midlands, which is north of London. His given name was Francis, but he was always known as Frank. He had a younger sister and a younger brother. As a child, he earned admittance to study at Wigston School. Many years later, Dr. Preston named a Moraine State Park trail in honor of his boyhood school. It is in the southeast portion of the park and crosses some land that Preston once owned. Over the course of his life, Dr. Preston earned several university degrees, including 2 doctorates. His early training was as a civil engineer, but shortly after completing his training in Loughborough, England, pictured here, he switched his area of interest to glass. This was during World War I, when his country was in great need of improved camera lenses for aerial surveillance. We know a lot about Dr. Preston from his memoirs, Boys of the Old Brigade. You can read it for yourself. Inquire at the genealogy desk on the 2nd floor of the Butler Public Library. His 2-volume set is dedicated in memoriam to the Boys of the Old Brigade, including so many of my school friends who died in World War I or as a result of that war. After the war, he worked with George Eastman in Rochester, New York. Later, he took a position in Butler, Pennsylvania, with Standard Plate and Glass. In 1927, he opened Preston Laboratories for glass research. He became very successful, earning a solid reputation internationally as a glass consultant and as an expert courtroom witness. He moved his company, Preston Laboratories, to Meridian, with his new building, shown here, about 1937. If we enter in the front door, we are in reception, with 3 secretaries and the switchboard. A center hall runs the length of the building, giving access to the library to the right, the chemistry lab, the drafting and map room in the back right corner, 2 research offices, Dr. Preston's office, physics and testing room on the back left corner, receiving up front, and the machine shop. The second front door leads upstairs to the small 2nd-story apartment that was originally for the groundskeeper. In 1947, after the groundskeeper died, the Prestons moved in when their downtown landlord sold the building where they lived. Both Prestons lived in that small apartment for the rest of their lives. Within a few years of opening the laboratory, he added more buildings on the 88-acre grounds. As his business continued to grow and his staff included many competent scientists, he found time to explore the Muddy Creek and Slippery Rock Gorge areas and feed his favorite avocations as a naturalist. He was a great enthusiast of geology and birds. Back in his 20s, he had observed what he perceived to be evidence of a great glacial lake, but 2 decades passed before he could really follow up on that interest. Now he could spend a lot of time examining the land to establish the boundaries of the Great Glacial Lake and how that water discharged as the glacier receded. I would encourage you to visit the grounds of Preston Park on South Eberhart Road, which today is operated by Butler Township. Check their website for tour opportunities. The grounds are open for walking. Jane Preston remembers her husband, Dr. Frank Preston, becoming enamored with the idea of recreating an ancient lake at Muddy Creek. Frank wanted to map the extent of the terminal moraine, which would tell him the ancient lake boundaries. The crucial thing was having the gas to get there. He couldn't do any detailed survey work until we could get gas, Jane explained. Gas was rationed during World War II. After the war, Frank and Jane would take day trips to Muddy Creek. I went along to drive, and he would tell me where to stop. I'd get out and pick apples. Frank would study rocks. It was fun. Frank's visits to the valley became routine, and his fascination with the ancient lake grew into a vision of creating a grand state park and recreational lake for the people of Western Pennsylvania. He saw the big picture. He always could, Jane recalled. Dr. Preston is on the left with Mrs. Jane Preston and dog Kip, and Edmund Watts Arthur on the right. Both explored the glacial area for some time, but they did not actually meet until the 1940s. Realizing their common interest, expertise, and experience, they became friends. The two men studied and conducted field research together on land affected by the Wisconsin Glacier. Edmund Watts Arthur was interested in the glacial history for many years. He was an attorney by profession, practicing in Pittsburgh for 50 years, but he had lifelong interests as a recognized amateur geologist and naturalist. He was a book writer about nature with a column in the Pittsburgh Sun-Telegraph with the byline, The Country Rambler. They were later compiled in this book. Take special note of his name, Edmund Watts Arthur. Yes, Lake Arthur is named for Ned Arthur, as is the Watts Bay Marina on North Shore. This map is from the DCNR Trail of Geology, Park Guide 4. The glacial lake at this site was named for Lake Watts, represented here in darker blue. The much larger Lake Edmund was to the north. Dr. Preston recommended adoption of these names to honor his late friend, Edmund Watts Arthur. Others sometimes joined them. Dr. O.E. Jennings sometimes ventured out with Preston and Arthur. Dr. Jennings taught that the highest use of a piece of land could be non-use, and that precious areas such as Presque Isle, Ohio Pile, Cook Forest, McConnell's Mill, Pymatooning, Blazing Star Prairie, and others should be preserved for the delight of future generations. Today, the Jennings Environmental Education Center is named in recognition of this man and his work. Warm summer sun, shine kindly here. Warm southern wind, blow softly here. Green sod above, lie light, lie light. Good night, dear heart, good night, good night. Unexpectedly, Edmund Watts Arthur died on October 8, 1948, at age 74. He had worked at his law office that morning and was walking on a Pittsburgh downtown street at noon when he suffered a fatal heart attack. In a personal note written to one of Arthur's daughters, Dr. Preston recalled the dreams that he and Arthur had for the future of the Muddy Creek Basin, regretting that they might not be realized with the loss of his good friend. This plaque stands outside the Moraine State Park office, placed there by the family at the 25th Park Dedication Observance. It reads, Lake Arthur, named in recognition of Edmund Watts Arthur, 1874 to 1948. Eminent Pittsburgh attorney and distinguished humanitarian, essayist, conservationist, ornithologist, botanist, and geologist, who, with Dr. Frank Preston, surveyed the present lake area that had been impounded by the terminal moraine during the glaciation periods. Perhaps in the late 1930s, Dr. Preston had purchased 300 acres along Whippoorwill Hill Road, which overlooked Isle. He had long-range plans to buy a home on the land. However, when he married in 1942, Jane did not want any part of building on that land, considering the area too wild and rough. There were still many oil wells and coal mines in the area. On October 21st, just short of 2 weeks after the death of his friend, Ned Arthur, Dr. Preston showed a great turnaround in his thoughts about the joint dream. Instead of letting it die with Arthur, he summoned distinguished friends from Carnegie Museum, shown here, and the University of Pittsburgh to first have lunch at his home. Then he led a field trip to his property, which at that time had a vista that was not blocked by the tall trees we see today. As his friends gathered, he laid out the prospect of recreating the great glacial lake and repurposing the land for recreation and nature study. The men responded with enthusiasm. Great idea. But the logistics involved were daunting. There were several groups that were already considering geologic and botanical places of significance in western Pennsylvania. For a project of this size and importance, one formal group was needed. In January 1951, the GPPA, the Greater Pittsburgh Parks Association, changed their name to Western Pennsylvania Conservancy to better represent their expanded mission. On March 2nd, 1952, the group obtained legal status by the Pittsburgh Court of Common Pleas. That October 21st, 1948 meeting is commemorated by this Western Pennsylvania Conservancy sign located at the Pleasant Valley Point parking lot on the South Shore. The sign notes Dr. Preston's leadership, the presence of the ancient glacial lake, and the work of the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy to bring about Moraine State Park. Work moved forward that raised many questions. What sort of park? How big? What would be the main purpose of the land use? And what about the lake? Here's another view of the vast Muddy Creek Basin in the winter. Notice how broad and flat it is. It is said that the early settlers named this area Pleasant Valley, a name still used today. Here are two more men enlisted to support the project. Judge George Keister sat on the bench in Butler County. Dr. M. Grand Netting of the University of Pittsburgh later wrote the book 50 Years of Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, one of my main resources of information about Moraine and McConnell's Mill state parks. In 1959, the General Assembly of Pennsylvania enacted House Bill 2386, authorizing $1 million to the acquisition of lands for Western Pennsylvania park development. John Eisler of Butler immediately organized a meeting on January 25th, 1960 in Harrisburg, and traveled there with a strong group of local leaders, including Judge Keister, to make it plain that the people of Butler County want the lake in Muddy Creek Valley. Their case was strong, and $250,000 was approved. The plan could officially move forward. Today, the John Eisler Picnic Grove sits prominently at the northern end of Crestline Picnic Area, with commanding views in all directions of the lake. Eisler's leadership and continued involvement with both McConnell's Mill and Moraine State Parks helped make them a reality. Finally, financing was secure, plans were coming together, and construction could begin. Please continue the story with part 3 of creating Moraine State Park. We'll move to actual construction of the dam, the highway bridges, the park facilities, and the dedication. My book, Moraine State Park, is available locally at the Cranberry Township Target, Newcastle Giant Eagle on Butler Road, Owlet Gift Shop, Jennings Environmental Education Center Gift Shop, Barnes & Noble in Cranberry Township, and online at Amazon and Arcadia Publishing. I present many programs to local historical societies, nature clubs, Rotary clubs, libraries, senior groups, family reunions, church groups, and others. Contact me through my Facebook page, Polly Shaw, author and presenter. Thanks. See you soon with part 3 of the story, Creating Moraine State Park.